Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, March 1st, 2022, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 United States Senate elections. My prediction for the month of March as we get closer to the election, probably sometime around May, June, July, and the months after, we are going to be doing this once every 2 weeks because our Senate elections are going to change. We officially began primary season today with the state of Texas announcing that they are going to have their primaries, having their actual primaries in terms of their governor elections, House elections, and a bunch of other statewide offices. Unfortunately, they do not have a Senate election, so that won't really matter for the sake of this video. But what we are going to be taking a look at today is a map that is going to change, not necessarily ever so slightly, but will change relative to the old February map because our national environment has gotten different, and the things that matter to voters are also going to be very different moving on through this month. Just a month ago, Russia did not intend on invading Ukraine, at least known to national officials. It became more relevant and more apparent to United States intelligence over the past 3 weeks. And it is something that I'm sure that was discussed and was deliberated through Russia. I mean, we all know about Crimea and other incidents that sort of indicated this was going to happen. But the amount of things that have changed on the international level in the past month alone really does put the United States in a very different position than they were before, and it also means that the outlook and the view on President Biden is likely going to change with it. And I understand that, we're in the middle of what is now going to be a war in Europe, and we are in the middle of a very tumultuous scene between Ukraine and Russia and NATO and the United States and the involvement of other third parties. But at the end of the day, things are occurring here in terms of our own borders in the United States, and things will be impacted by international events such as those. I mean, to act as if that President Biden won't at all be impacted by the situation in Ukraine is completely wrong. There are going to be either positive or negative repercussions based off of Joe Biden's actions, based off of Joe Biden's sanctions, based off of the impact of it on gas prices and everyday amenities for the American public. So we keep that all into consideration, and we're going to enter into our prediction for the 2022 election cycle. Now, we're going to start off with all of the Republican safe seats. These are seats that really aren't competitive and might have been previously, but simply are no more. For instance, a state such as Missouri, which was decided by 2.6% back in 2016, and this exact Senate seat is probably, and based on my electoral projection, going to go to the Republicans by more than 15 points. Now, keep in mind our national environment. We are working within a situation in which the Republican Party is up nationwide. And what do I mean by up? Well, not only is Joe Biden disapproved of as the incumbent Democratic president, but also the generic ballot shows the Republican Party ahead by 2.2%. I made a video the other day talking about how there's about a 10-point to 12-point fall off between the approval rating of Biden and the generic ballot lead, and you can see this become very apparent on FiveThirtyEight as well. Joe Biden is disapproved of by 12 points more than he is approved of across the nation, and the generic ballot only puts the Republicans ahead by 2 points. You're literally seeing nearly an exact 10-point fall off. So with that all in mind, with that all taken into consideration, we understand that our Senate map isn't going to be as red as some people might expect based off of the simple electoral understanding of President Biden's approval rating. Now, many of these states are safe Democratic states as well. The Democrats have 44 seats that are either not up for re-election or are going to be considered safe. And you might be surprised to see that I did not characterize the state of Washington as a safe Democratic seat. Now, I did this intentionally. I made a video talking about new polls that came out of the state that sort of indicate that this race might actually be more competitive. You might be thinking, okay, it's the state of Washington. Is it ever going to be competitive? I mean, looking at my last ever projections from the beginning of the year, Washington never was in the likely Democratic column. But I would point out that sometimes we are taken by surprise. And in looking at some of these polls, let's see if we can actually get back to our latest polls here and go ahead and take a look at, I don't know if it's actually going to work, unfortunately. Let me go ahead and refresh the page, see if it ends up doing anything. Going back, okay, it's messing up on me here, but we'll wait for that to load and we'll head back over to our map here. But the state of Washington moved down into the likely column simply because of the fact that new data from the state seems to suggest that it might be returning to where it was back in 2010. Now, if you weren't closely watching politics back in 2010, because I know I wasn't, you might not necessarily understand the red wave type of year that it was. And to be fair, I mean, I wasn't closely watching the American political scene. I didn't have a YouTube channel. But what I've gathered so far is that because of the anti-Obama wave, because of the surge in support for the Tea Party, states that were never, ever competitive became competitive. For instance, the state of Washington came down into this toss-up column. The state of Illinois was in the toss-up column. The state of Colorado was as well. Colorado probably makes more sense, but when you take a look at this, for instance, you are looking at states such as Iowa, that 2 years prior went to Obama, pretty handedly, that is in the safe Republican column. Georgia, Arizona, all states that we know now as swing states. North Carolina, right? And you move over into the toss-up column, and what do you see? You see Washington. You see Illinois. Even California wasn't safe blue. It went to the Democrats by 10 points. 10 points. West Virginia, was on par with California when it came down to victories for the Democratic Party. So we might be seeing that similar type of thing happen to the state of Washington. I don't know why the polling data isn't loading here across the states. Let's see, Senate elections. Let me go ahead and if I can find that exact poll. It shows Patty Murray ahead by just 9 points statewide. While I do think that I could very well return to being safe in time for the election, I'm more so being precautious and also just understanding that the state of Washington isn't always a safe state. When you take a look at the presidential margins in the past, you'll see that the state itself went to Biden by 19, went to Clinton by a safe margin, but get this, did not go to Obama in 2012 by a safe margin. And in many of the other elections, specifically governor elections, it actually has been much, much closer. So a lot to unpack there, but that's the reasoning behind Washington. Now, moving into these 10 remaining states, I'm sure that all of you understand that these are swing states. All of you understand that these are states that we have been so closely watching for the past year now, 2 years. I mean, even through the 2020 election, every single one of these states was closely watched. And they were watched because they were competitive, because the Democrats and the Republicans had near equal chances at victory here. And considering that our current Senate composition is 50 to 50, every single seat matters. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party have no room for error. They cannot afford to lose a singular seat. Otherwise, it jeopardizes either party's chances at advancing their own policy. For instance, if Republicans were to lose one, the Democrats would remain in the majority, but then it would take the power away from Kyrsten Sinema or Joe Manchin and give it to that new Democrat who could then cancel out their vote and then break the tie with Kamala Harris, understanding that at least one of those, Sinema or Manchin, would move over sides. And they have split on decisions before. Or, for instance, in a worst case for the Democratic Party, obviously, if they lose a seat, the Republican Party automatically wins the majority. So 45 to 45 really doesn't get us anywhere. So we're going to start characterizing states that are likely. These are states that are more than likely going to go to the GOP. This means I believe they will be decided between a margin of 5 and 15%. And let's go ahead and take a look. The first state that I would characterize as likely red is the state of Ohio. Now, looking at Josh Mandel continue down this very big rightward spiral, I think this is something that actually might jeopardize his chances at victory in the future. He has moved down this conspiracy theorist, right-wing, extremist type of ideology, which is very different from his 2012 Senate campaign. Josh Mandel ran in 2012 against Sherrod Brown and nearly won, I would say. Not necessarily nearly won, but put up a good fight. 2018, he was the Republican frontrunner, dropped out due to issues with family, and then ultimately ended up running in this election after dropping out in 2018. But the difference between 10 years ago with Josh Mandel's 2012 campaign was that he was a much more moderate and tempered Republican. This time around, he has taken some very extreme policies. I mean, he has taken some very large positions, anti-mask, anti-X, Y, and Z, pretty much being anything against the Democratic Party more so than President Trump. But I still think that he's going to win. Ohio, at the end of the day, is a state that voted for Donald Trump in the presidential election twice by 8.1. Literally election back-to-back, you saw less than a 0.1% shift in the state of Ohio. There's not much hope here for the Democratic Party. The next state I would characterize is the state of Florida. Marco Rubio has those minority groups locked down, at least relative to other Republicans. What I see for Marco Rubio is that he has shown an excellent display at his ability to win over Hispanic voters. One of the very few states where Hispanic voters are a driving factor for victories for either side is the state of Florida. It is one of the few states with an extremely high Hispanic population, and when you take a look at Marco Rubio's 2016 election results, 2016, when Donald Trump won the state by just 1.1%, Marco Rubio won by 7.7%. That means there were voters out there who were willingly and proudly voting for Hillary Clinton that said, nope, I'm voting for Marco Rubio. And when you take a look at one of the counties, two counties, with an extremely high Hispanic population, Miami-Dade and Broward County, Patrick Murphy, the Democratic incumbent, sure won here, but nowhere near the margin that Hillary Clinton won by. In Miami-Dade County, Hillary Clinton defeated Donald Trump by 33 points. In the Senate election, Patrick Murphy defeated Marco Rubio by 11. And now seeing that Miami-Dade County went to Joe Biden by a margin of 6 in 2020. Marco Rubio is absolutely in that likely column, and I think it absolutely is a fair estimation at this point in time. Do the Republicans have any other likely states? I would argue no, and that's a difference from my old map, and we'll talk about why that is. The state of Colorado, I would say, is likely for the Democratic Party. I really don't see the GOP having any type of major gains here. Cory Gardner has not confirmed that he's going to run for Senate, and this Democratic incumbent actually survived back in 2010 when, you were looking at states such as Illinois and Washington State on the toss-up seats map. The state of Colorado still went to the Democrats by about 2 percentage points here, and that was Michael Bennet, who was serving as the incumbent just as he is right now. This is the same Michael Bennet who decided to run for president of the United States in 2020. But the main thing that I want you to take away from that is that he survived a red wave, and it wasn't by 100, 200, 1,000 votes. You're talking about 2 points in a state that is much more Democratic now. If you take a look at the shift in terms of the presidential margin between 2008 and 2020, Colorado actually got 4.5% more Democratic. Keep in mind that in 2008, Colorado was called at poll closing for Barack Obama. Relative to 2012, this is a state that shifted 8 points. Relative to 2016, it shifted by 9 points. Colorado has gotten increasingly more Democratic, especially over the past couple of years. And it will continue to go that way, and I see no chance for the GOP at actually winning here. I think the Democrats will have a likely margin of victory, but we pretty much know who's going to win. Now, moving into these remaining states, these are states that I don't really think don't really have the possibility of being likely states by the end of this election cycle. Maybe at most the state of North Carolina, because that's actually a state I just moved down from likely Republican, and we'll start off with that one since I've already revealed that I've shifted it. But we'll talk a bit about that, and then we'll get into the main states that have been pretty much tilt or lean for nearly the very beginning, I think, with the exception of Nevada and New Hampshire, with different candidates in the race at the time, or potential candidates in the race at the time. The state of North Carolina is a state where the Democratic Party just won a lawsuit. More specifically, I believe Mark Elias put forth this petition to the North Carolina Supreme Court that the maps were gerrymandered, that they were unfairly giving the GOP 11 out of the 14 seats in the upcoming midterm election, and they won that case. And as a result, the state of North Carolina had to draw brand new districts that gave Democrats opportunities for pickups. It gave Republicans 8 seats. And it gave Democrats, I believe, 6? I think that it's an 8-6 map, or it's a 7-7 and 1 competitive seat. And that, I think, is going to be a good thing for the Democratic Party. And I say it not because of the House elections. I do think that is a fair point. But for the sake of the Senate election, having more competitive House districts will entice more Democratic votes. When you take a look at some of these House districts in 2016 or even 2018, the Democratic Party did not always run candidates. There were races where Democrats were not even petitioning them simply because they knew the GOP would win, because of gerrymandering. Well, now the Democrats have more of a chance across the state, in the state legislature, in the state house, in the House of Representatives elections across the state. There will be more enthusiasm there for Democrats to turn out the vote, because they will have top contenders every single place you look. And that could very well bring that down to lean. I also don't think that the state of North Carolina is going to be decided by a likely margin, considering where we are right now. The GOP has made it very clear in their generic ballot polling that they are unable to win over voters the same way that they were in 2010 and 2014, and it honestly is quite alarming for them. But for right now, I am comfortable characterizing North Carolina as a lean GOP state, and we will continue over into this region. The state of Georgia will also share it with a lean Republican characterization. I think Herschel Walker being up, 3-4 points in polling data, up 2 points in some, all seem to indicate, not only in polls, but in terms of our national environment, in terms of Georgia's approval of Biden, in terms of the national approval of Biden, that this state will still be decided by a lean Republican characterization. Not much changing from my last video, so I think that is a fair estimation at this point in time. While I do think Raphael Warnock is an exceptionally strong candidate, he was actually pretty good as someone who was originally viewed as a sacrificial lamb. I think looking at Raphael Warnock's ability to win in 2021, I am impressed, but I'm not necessarily going to see that translate into a 2022 victory as of right now. It very well could. A lean margin doesn't mean much. It definitely could change overnight. But as of right now, I would say The environment just isn't there for Raphael Warnock to win in a state that Biden only won by 0.2. I mean, obviously, Biden has lost more than 0.2% of support. And if you take a look at the national numbers, I mean, you're talking about over a 20-point swing relative to the 2020 election, which means the state of Georgia is probably not nearly as pro-Biden as they were 2 years ago. And moving over to the next few states, we're going to go ahead and characterize the Rust Belt states together. The state of Wisconsin, I'm going to move down into the tilt Republican column. I'm actually going to shift over the state of Pennsylvania into the lean Democratic column. Now, I might get some pushback on this, and I think that, while that is fair criticism, I also do want to say that the state of Pennsylvania doesn't really have any direction when it comes down to the GOP. Well, Democrats do have top two contenders, the lieutenant governor and Conor Lamb, the lieutenant governor being John Fetterman. I think that their Senate election is much more guided. I think that at this point in time, we pretty much know that Conor Lamb is going to be that nominee. While there is still very much a chance that John Fetterman doesn't win, we generally have an idea of who the nominee is going to be. In the state of Pennsylvania, only one Republican has actually hit double digits, and that's Dr. Oz, and he hit 11% in the most recent poll. That's not high. By a lot. The GOP is very much without direction, and the state of Pennsylvania also has a coinciding governor election in which Josh Shapiro, the Democrat who outperformed Biden and Hillary and Biden and Clinton back 2020 and 2016. I mean, you are looking at a state where they have a strong Democratic contender on the governor's level, which could translate into votes and victories on the Senate level. And as of right now, the GOP really isn't showing themselves with such an advantage. I mean, their frontrunner, Sean Parnell, who was endorsed by Trump, had decided to drop out earlier on in this year. And in the state of Wisconsin, or actually earlier on than this year, I think maybe in November of 2021, the state of Wisconsin, and moving it down into the tilt Republican column, what we've seen is that Ron Johnson has taken some very interesting stances on Ukraine, and I think that will be ammunition for the Democratic Party. In addition to that, he is continuing his entire tirade against the vaccine, against COVID-19 in specific, and I think while voters aren't necessarily pro-mask or pro-COVID-19 closures, I do think they will recognize when someone is actively spreading misinformation. And that has been a very big consideration when it comes down to Ron Johnson in this Senate election, that he proves to be a liability, especially later down the line, if people begin to trust people like the CDC, Dr. Anthony Fauci more, or at least at the same level. The majority of the nation still trusts many of the guidelines, still trusts COVID-19 to be a real thing. And him taking a stance in a swing state that, captures the essence of the United States isn't necessarily the best thing. While the national environment tells me that the Republicans are going to win, had this been a neutral environment, I don't think that the state of Wisconsin would be going red. But again, that's not the circumstance that we're in. And in the final three states, I'm going to characterize Nevada and Arizona together because they will now share a characterization, and then I will characterize the state of New Hampshire. Nevada, I'm moving down into the tilt Republican column. In fact, I might be so inclined in the next video to make it a tilt Democratic seat. Catherine Cortez Masto now leads Adam Laxalt in the most recent poll by 9 percentage points across the state, but there is just such a significant amount of the vote that is undecided when it comes down to that state. I would also like to say that Adam Laxalt might necessarily have the name recognition that he will have once we actually start to get into the full-on campaign season. As of right now, Nevada isn't super happy with Biden. They seem to be fine with Sisolak, which is different than where they were maybe months ago. I think Catherine Cortez Masto definitely can be redeemed. I think that there is absolutely a place for her in the Senate in 2022, which is why a tilt Republican lean would mean that it just takes a shift, a very narrow shift of 1 percentage point to move it in the opposite direction. So for right now, the state of Nevada is going to remain at tilt Republican, and Arizona is as well. Again, not many advancements for the state of Arizona. It just isn't the right year for Mark Kelly. Again, he is a strong candidate. If there was a weak Democrat, Arizona probably would be a 5 to 10 point state for the GOP. I mean, it is a state that very much fluctuates with the national environment, as it did in 2020. Democrats only won Arizona for the first time since 96. I mean, Democrats won Indiana in 2008, and then it immediately went back to the GOP. That could technically happen in Arizona, but Democrats have the right candidate. They just don't necessarily have the right environment or the right year. So Nevada, Arizona are going to remain in the tilt Republican column, but again, tilt means that they can certainly change very rapidly overnight. And now that there are 3 Republican seats that Democrats have been targeting heavily that are in the tilt Republican column, it gives them more opportunities to win in the future. And in the final state, the state of New Hampshire, we are not going to see a change in characterization. Though the incumbent here, Maggie Hassan, is defeating her opponents by 13 points, I don't think it is going to be a likely seat for the Democrats. New Hampshire is still a swing state. And again, there are a lot of undecided voters there. I think it is only fair at this point in time to characterize it and keep it in the lean Democratic column, and that's how I am comfortable characterizing this map. So in this final map, the Democratic Party has 1 pickup in the state of Pennsylvania, and the GOP has 3 in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. It's not as bad as a map as what you saw, earlier on in the election cycle. What you saw back in October was a worse map than this. What you saw in November was even worse. What you saw in December was a continuation. It went back to the Democrats in January a little bit more, in February a little bit more, and now so in March. But I think that this is the best the Democratic Party can do given the national environment. If things start to change in favor of the Democratic Party, maybe expect some of these tilt states to flip, or if it becomes worse for the Democratic Party, expect some of these tilt states to shift back further into the Republican column and maybe some of these lean Democratic seats to flip as well, as they did back in November and December. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.